6 Iranian missiles just ignited their engines, locked onto the USS Abraham Lincoln. $13 billion of American firepower with 5,000 sailors aboard. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what the Iranians thought would be their greatest victory turned into their worst nightmare in 93 seconds flat. To understand how a regional power convinced itself it could blindside a floating American city, we have to look at the weapon that wasn't supposed to exist in their arsenal, or at least not in this configuration. The missiles sitting on that coastal rail were variants of the Noor, a piece of military hardware that is effectively a Frankenstein copy of the Chinese C-802, which itself was a reverse-engineered clone of 1980s Western technology. Iran had spent decades taking apart foreign tech, swapping out guidance chips for commercial electronics, and welding on larger fuel tanks to extend the range, creating a subsonic cruise missile that looks terrifying on a parade float, but operates with the technological sophistication of a pocket calculator compared to modern warfare standards. They believed that by launching a salvo of 6 simultaneously, they could overwhelm the carrier's tracking systems, relying on a strategy of saturation that worked in naval wargames back in the disco era. But warfare has been redefined, and the Iranian commanders were about to learn that their classified attack plan had been obsolete before the first engine even spooled up. The concept of a surprise attack in the 21st century is a myth, specifically when you are dealing with the United States Navy. Before the Iranian launch officer even pressed the firing stud, a highly classified constellation of Space Force infrared satellites in geosynchronous orbit had already detected the thermal blooms of the rocket motors. You cannot hide heat against the cold backdrop of the ocean surface. These satellites beam data at the speed of light, meaning the Combat Information Center on the USS Abraham Lincoln knew they were being shot at before the missiles had even cleared the launch rail. This is the disparity of modern combat. The enemy was fighting with maps and stopwatches, while the American sailors were fighting with light-speed data links and artificial intelligence. The 6 Noor missiles climbed to their cruise altitude, skimming the waves at Mach 0.9, unaware that they were already being painted by the SPY-1D phased array radar. This radar system doesn't just spin around like in old submarine movies. It is a static, four-faced beast that stares in all directions simultaneously, capable of tracking over 100 targets while guiding missiles to intercept them. The radar operators aboard the Lincoln didn't panic. They simply watched the geometry of the engagement unfold with the cold precision of accountants balancing a ledger. The sheer audacity of firing subsonic missiles at an Aegis-equipped carrier strike group is akin to throwing a rock at a sniper who has been watching you through a scope for an hour. As the Iranian missiles closed the distance, the carrier's automated defense logic recommended a firing solution. This is where the timeline compresses. In the span of mere seconds, vertical launch cells on the escort destroyers burst open. The Standard Missile 2, or SM-2, is a weapon designed specifically to hunt down aerial threats that think they are being clever. These interceptors don't just fly towards the target, they communicate with the ship's radar mid-flight, adjusting their trajectory to account for any evasive maneuvers the enemy might try. But the Noor missiles didn't maneuver. They flew straight and level, slaves to their primitive inertial mid-course guidance, effectively presenting themselves as stationary targets for the American interceptors. The engagement that followed was brutally efficient. 3 miles out, the first SM-2 met the lead Iranian missile. There was no cinematic explosion, just a violent kinetic impact that turned the sophisticated Iranian airframe into a cloud of shrapnel and unburnt fuel. Then the second, then the third. The sky above the Persian Gulf was filled with the white smoke trails of American dominance. The remaining Iranian missiles, now confused by the electronic jamming countermeasures flooding their seekers, lost their lock and plunged harmlessly into the water. It took exactly 93 seconds from the moment of detection to the complete neutralization of the threat. The $13 billion carrier hadn't even altered its course. But the story doesn't end with the defense, because the United States Navy operates on a principle of reciprocity that is heavily weighted in their favor. You do not get to shoot at a carrier and go home to dinner. While the smoke was still clearing from the interception, the flight deck of the Abraham Lincoln was already alive. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets, which were already on combat air patrol, received a digital data packet containing the exact GPS coordinates of the Iranian launch site. This is the part of the equation the Iranian commanders forgot. The same radar that tracks the incoming missile can backtrack the trajectory to the exact square meter of soil it was fired from. The Hornets didn't need to dogfight, they just needed to deliver a package. They banked hard, their wings loaded with AGM-88E advanced anti-radiation guided missiles. These weapons are designed to hunt down radar emitters, the very eyes the Iranians were using to try, and track their own missiles. The pilots didn't even have to see the target. The missiles slid off the rails, their rocket motors igniting with a roar that signaled the end of the Iranian battery. Back on the coast, the Iranian crews were likely trying to reload or assess their hit, unaware that a supersonic death sentence was already in the terminal phase of flight. The AGM-88Es struck the radar vans and the transporter erector launchers with surgical precision. The explosion didn't just destroy the equipment, it erased the entire grid square. A battery that had taken years to build and millions of dollars to assemble was converted into a crater in a fraction of a second. The retaliation was absolute. It redefined the concept of a proportional response by demonstrating that any attempt to touch American assets would result in the immediate and total cessation of the attacker's existence. Now, let's break down the financials of this 93-second encounter, because the math is staggering. The 6 Iranian Noor missiles cost roughly $1.5 million each, totaling a $9 million investment in this failed ambush. The infrastructure destroyed by the retaliatory strike added another $25 million to their bill. On the American side, the Navy expended roughly $8 million in interceptors and air-to-ground munitions. On paper, it looks like a trade, but here is the kicker. That $8 million expenditure protected a $13 billion asset and, more importantly, preserved the strategic dominance of the waterway. The return on investment for the United States was infinite because the message sent was priceless. It proved that the Carrier Strike Group is not just a weapon, it is a system of systems that renders conventional attacks useless. The Iranians tried to use 20th century tactics against 21st century technology, and the result was a masterclass in failure. But what is truly shocking is not the violence of the exchange, but the calmness of it. While all of this was happening, the radar locks, the missile launches, the supersonic intercepts, and the retaliatory strikes, the dinner service in the mess hall of the USS Abraham Lincoln continued without interruption. 5,000 sailors ate their meals, completely unbothered by the fact that 6 cruise missiles had just tried to kill them. The ship's gyro stabilizers absorbed the recoil of the launches, and the hum of the nuclear reactors never wavered. This is the ultimate flex of a superpower, the ability to wage high-intensity warfare as a background administrative task. The breakdown of this engagement reveals a terrifying reality for America's adversaries. It shows that the window for a lucky shot has closed. You cannot surprise a system that watches the entire electromagnetic spectrum. You cannot overwhelm a defense grid that can track and engage more targets than you have missiles. And you certainly cannot survive the counterpunch that comes from a carrier air wing that can strike you before you even know your own attack has failed. The 93 seconds that shocked everyone didn't shock the sailors on that ship. It only shocked the observers who thought the gap between the US Navy and the rest of the world had narrowed. It hasn't. It has become a canyon. This incident wasn't a battle. It was a live-fire calibration exercise for the Aegis combat system, paid for by the Iranian military budget. If this breakdown showed you something new about how modern naval warfare actually works, smash that like button and subscribe for more brutal breakdowns of military reality. We cut through the propaganda to show you the mechanics of dominance. The USS Abraham Lincoln is still patrolling, its radar is still spinning, and its magazines are still full. The ocean is vast, but for the enemies of the United States, there is nowhere to hide.